moving back to industry. His name is Tarek Besold, and he is the AI lead at Alpha Health AI Lab. He has just arrived here to Barcelona very recently, so we really want to give him a warm welcome, of course. He was formerly a lecturer at the City University of London and was leading their data science program. So let's give it up for Tarek.
Thank you. We are a moonshot lab. And what that is, what we do, and why I'm talking to you, you'll see now. What I will do to you, and what I thought would be 15 minutes, but having a look at my clock, I actually got like 45 minutes to treat you. No, not going to happen, is I'll first tell you a little about Telefónica Innovación Alpha. Then we will have a look at Alpha Health, which is one particular moonshot within Telefónica Innovación Alpha. Then we will have a look at the Alpha Health AI Lab, which is a new entity within Alpha Health. See how that like triples down? And then I'll talk a little to you about Trustworthy AI, like why you should not trust AI and how we could change that. Before there is, I believe, at least one beer for everyone involved, right? Okay, he's nodding.
But at the end.
Yeah. So, who or what is Alpha? We are basically Europe's first moonshot factory. So many of you might have heard of what formerly has been called Google X, and since they converted into Alphabet, is only called X. Moonshot factories are high-powered, well, labs which take on tasks that seem too big to actually be solvable, but if they would be solved, you're going to change the world. It's basically like sending a man to the moon. Completely crazy, but you know the story. So the intersection is between a huge problem, and when we say huge, we mean things like curing chronic disease, bringing energy to the next 2.7 billion people worldwide. In our case, it has to require a radical solution. It has to have something to do with breakthrough technology. So it's something for which there currently is the tech not yet available. It seems that we at least roughly know what the breakthrough would have to be. And if it works, it's going to make this planet a better place. And the two examples I just gave aren't entirely random. So these are our youngest siblings called Alpha Energy. They actually started in April this year, I think. They're currently ramping up their team. And their mission is simple and straightforward: deliver energy to the next 2.7 billion people worldwide. Basically, get a smart grid to the second and third world. Hey, right? Why not? And since, of course, we are the oldest siblings, so we have to be at least as megalomaniac as the younger ones, our mission basically is eliminate behavioral disease from the top 10 global killers. What do we mean with that? And this is the advertisement part of the pitch, so bear with me, but the slides are kind of cute. If you have a look at how healthcare costs are actually developing worldwide over, let's say, the last 50 years, you see that they are growing quicker than the GDPR. So you sum up the overall GDPR development worldwide, and you have a look at how healthcare impacts in percent. And healthcare, oddly enough, is getting more and more expensive. We're getting better at it. Like, we can cure stuff we couldn't cure a couple of years ago, not even to talk about decades ago. But somehow, something is odd about the graph. Well, it becomes a bit more palpable if you have a look at what's actually killing people. So if you go back to the 1900s, infectious disease was amongst the killers #1. You just walked into a rusty nail and actually you wanted to say goodbye to your family. If you were lucky, you lost a leg. If not, you lost your life. This we kind of managed to deal with. So there are antibiotics, we have much better understanding of how cleanliness works, and we have much more advanced techniques. What we did not manage to tackle in a significant way, though, is chronic disease. So if you remove infectious diseases from the graph and you have a look at chronic disease, actually the levels are pretty stable. And if you now have a look at what makes for at around 70% of global disease, you can nail it to these 5 factors. So one of them is cancer, heart attacks, stroke, diabetes, and mental disorder. Another fun statistical fact, and we all know we can bend statistics as far as we want, but basically it's still good to know since 2000, for every life saved from an infectious disease, we have lost 2 lives to a chronic disease. the point about these 70% actually is that most people think, well, it has to do with your genes or it has to do with environmental factors like pollution, what have you. This is plain wrong. So if you do a causal analysis over it, round about 10% are caused by genetic modifications or, well, mutations, deficiencies, what have you. Round about 10% are actually caused by environmental poisoning, but round about 75% go back to direct behavioral elements we ourselves undertake. So lack of exercise, the plenty of food we have available. Quoting our CEO, the marginal cost of a calorie has never been so low as it is today. So if you have a look at what you're paying at McDonald's per calorie, that's ridiculously low. Smoking. By the way, the percentage of people smoking worldwide is increasing because tobacco companies push into China, India, they're unlocking new markets. Excessive alcohol abuse or excessive drinking generally, and stress. So whilst we make all these advances in terms of medicine and in terms of overall improvement of living quality, or at least we think to do so, the question is, why is this not changing at all? And our attempt at an explanation basically has very much to do with us being humans. So we have not evolved in an environment like we currently have. We don't originate from an environment of plenty of food, plenty of information, plenty of everything. But we much more evolved in an environment where it was important to be competitive, to be social, to be in a pack. Of course, we aren't the first ones to figure that, but there's a bunch of people who actually got Nobel Awards for all of this, including the gentleman on, where do we have him? The right from your point of view, Danny Kahneman. Basically, a lot of why these behaviors arise presumably has to do with our cognitive and neuroscientific starting points. We are just not yet adapted to the environment we have. We have residues from another time. But once you realize that this is the case, you also may well have an attempt at changing it. So the moonshot question Alpha Health is trying to address is, what would it actually take to help people improve their conscious control over everyday behavior? And of course, I'm at an AI meetup, since our approach to this is a technological one. So we are trying to build tools which empower people. Tools which allow you to take decisions for what you think is your way into well-being. Health is one of the factors, but not everything. It's much more about well-being or living a good life, however you want to call it, and which then give you the ability and the possibility to overcome some of the hardwiring and some of the bad habits in order, well, to push down the 75% of chronic disease deaths. Okay, this is Alpha Health, a moonshot within Alpha, which is the moonshot factory of Telefonica. What now brings me here is this slide. So Alpha Health has been around for over 2 years. We are, I think, by now roughly 60, 70 people. 79, okay. We have an ingenious research team who are already doing really cool applied data science, who are already doing really cool behavioral analysis, we're doing really cool development. But given how the landscape is changing and given how big our ambitions are, we now decided to also go one step further and start a second AI lab, which will rather go into the translational research from theory to prototypes. So our current research team is doing more the applied side. They are in close touch with research, and they are in close touch with universities. We will try to take one step further towards the theoretical side and do the translational work. Given our mission, this is structured into 3 streams. One is Trustworthy AI. I'll tell you a little more about that on the next couple of slides, where there will actually also be some machine learning and stuff. One is Empathic AI, which is about multimodal emotional recognition and communication. And if you're around for the beers afterwards, Fermin can tell you the entire story for that. Hello, Fermin. Dude in the front row. And the third one, because, well, we actually try to be the good guys, and we started on an ethics charter. We will have to do whatever we do with data and whatever we do with machine learning in an anonymous and distributed way. So if you actually think about federated learning, and preferably on the edge, come and talk to us. Okay, so Trustworthy AI. What we do, or what we try to do, is complicated or a bit risky in two ways. First of all, we actually try to help people to change behavior, and we make recommendations for that. You better have a good story why your AI is doing what it's doing. First of all, because people usually tend to ask, well, why shouldn't I go for a drink but instead go for a run? So you better have a good story explaining it to them. And secondly, once you send someone for a run and 3 years later it turns out that they need an artificial knee because there was a reason why they had to go for a run, you better have a good reply to the regulator or the insurance why your engine actually recommended what it did. So these are the two sides of what we are looking into, and there is a bigger discussion about that. So the folks of you who tend to go to NIPS to ICML, as of lately, there is a mushroom-like multiplication of workshops featuring the words comprehensibility, interpretability, explainability in the titles. This is exactly our type of work as well. We look at it from the health angle or from the well-being angle. Other people look at it from credit scoring, from organ distribution, all of these things. And coming back to our deep learning friends, one of the problems, at least, which usually is claimed befalls deep learning, is that due to the complexity of the networks, it very often is not entirely clear why a decision was made the way it was made. Of course, this is a simplification. So deep learning is no magic. In theory, you can sit down, go through a network layer by layer, provided a virtually infinite number of sheets of paper, spans, and time, and you can come up with a perfect explanation why the network gave back what it gave back. Still, the question is this A, scalable, and is this B, practically applicable? So what people are much rather looking into now, the punchy claim is that, okay, the standard deep net or the standard current machine learning approach would be on the bottom layer. It's completely opaque. Our example here is a factory scene. You feed that thing, like you feed the black box the factory picture, you get back factory, but you have no freaking clue why it actually said factory. What currently is around and what's being discussed at these workshops, special tracks, journal issues, and so on, either falls into the category of comprehensible or of interpretable machine learning, or AI. Comprehensible basically means you remain with a black box, but the black box is talking. So you throw your picture at it, it tells you factory, but it also tells you halogen lights, concrete floor, boxes, machines, which allows you to be like, yeah, okay, this matches what I think a factory is, and thus I comprehend why it took the decision it took. Interpretable systems are, in a way, the holy grail of machine learning, because in theory, to be fully interpretable, you would have to be a white box system. You can sit an expert down, the expert looks at it and gives you the full explanation of why whatever happened, happened. If you now have a look at what actually is around, is that systems on the comprehensible side are only now being developed. Systems on the interpretable side, instead of opening fully the internal black box into a gray or white box, much rather go for either producing rules about the data, so I can compile a network into a tree, or I can extract the rules the network is actually depicting. But these rules very often tell you rather how the decision was taken, not why, especially if you're not an expert. The second approach, which currently is on the market and very popular, are these heat map approaches. So for picture classification, I get a heat map showing me which were the most relevant pixels or which were the most relevant picture elements for the classification reply I got. And this then basically works roughly like that. That illustration is taken from a paper by Václav Samek and the guys at the Heinrich Hertz Institute in Berlin, who are pretty much leading on these topics. So what's happening is you want to classify a rooster as a rooster. You feed it to your black box AI system. The black box AI system says rooster. You're wondering about why it might have done so. You now can do at least two things. Either you can start playing around with the individual pixels. So this is the upper LRP, layer-wise relevance, propagation decomposition. What you do there is you flip on and off entire pixels and you have a look, okay, how are the layers affected and which are the most relevant pixels? What you also can do is you can play a little around with partial derivatives, where you see how does a picture value, how does a pixel value actually impact on your classification. What you get back, for example, for the rooster case, is a little heat map. Do you see the mouse? Yeah. There's a little heat map up here, which corresponds to the head and the crown of the rooster. You, as an expert, look at it. You know what a rooster is. You know that this is characteristic for it, and you can say, okay, kind of makes sense. There are problems with these approaches, though. Take a somewhat unusual picture, and you throw it against Line, which is a similar, though not identical system, and it gives you the three most likely or most salient classifications. So it would first tell you, well, an electric guitar, then it would tell you an acoustic guitar, and then it would tell you a Labrador. And it always uses certain parts of the picture. Still, if you only get either of these, it's hard to tell what it actually should have been. And the much more funny and also staged example, like they targetedly built it like that, they tried to classify huskies from wolves. They tried to classify wolves from dogs. They trained the classifier, it worked amazingly well, and then they did precisely this pixel manipulation task, and it turns out that, oddly enough, for the wolf, the most salient for the classification is that white stuff in the background. It actually learns snow from no snow. Well, so much for the interpretable approach. Still, it's the best we currently have. Some people would now ask, but what about actual explanations? So, can you build a system which maybe takes the comprehensible route or maybe takes the interpretable route and actually churns out an explanation? So then we're not only doing deep learning, but then we're entering the full range of AI. So then we're probably also talking about doing some knowledge engineering, or what can you in order to provide actually human parsable approaches. And then, for example, because it's the simpler example, taking the case where you get the lights, the concrete floor and stuff, I feed that to a classical reasoner. I provide some psych or whatever as a background database, and the reasoner figures, oh, all of this tends to occur in a factory. So you can churn out a nice little sentence along the lines of, the image has halogen lights, a concrete floor, boxes, and many machines. These objects are often present in and related to factory operations. The machine thus believes the image is in a factory. Still, it's obvious that this has many other problems. It's not the solution to it. But what I'm currently trying to do is just to give you a bit of an idea of what explanations can be, could be, must be. Then, what I sneakily did, although to my big amusement, at least at BCN.ai, deep learning is pretty much equivalent to AI, I basically brought in some of the stuff which has been around since literally the 1950s. None of you twitched, but I mentioned knowledge bases, I mentioned symbols. Either you're already completely apathetic, or you're more open-minded than many people who fought the connectionist versus symbolist wars back in the 80s. Anyway, one of the questions you always get when you then have a look at these explainable AI approaches and systems is, well, we didn't have these problems back then. So people very often tell you that it's only due to us now working with signals and having complex distributed representations and not doing symbol pushing anymore. There is a community which actually already precluded and saw that coming a little. So this is the neural symbolic community. What they are trying to do is usually depicted with that cycle, but this is a bit overly complex. The basic idea is, how can I extract knowledge from a trained network, or how can I encode knowledge directly into a trained network? How can I close the gap between signals and symbols? I'm now going to show you a little experiment we did a while ago. It's just to give you a flavor of what's in the space there, because most of it is unexplored. Who of you has a dog? Excellent. Who of you goes occasionally hiking with your dog? People, you have to walk your dogs. So if you've ever come to one of these little cottages in the Alps or somewhere in the Pyrenees around here where they serve food, very often dogs are not allowed. You're not allowed to bring your dog onto the terrace. but next to the sign dogs are not allowed, they usually have a sign, if there's a dog, it has to be on the leash. If you think about this in terms of automated reasoning, this is going to explode your database because there is no dog. But if there is a dog, it has to be on a leash. Ex falso quod libet. What you're doing there, if you're trying to build it in a multi-agent system, is you're doing normative reasoning. So you're not dealing with real truth values anymore, you're more dealing with obligations. And one of the cases where this, for example, arises is in robo-soccer. So you probably know these little RoboCup competitions and stuff. Well, what we back then did was looking into how RoboCup actually works. And robo-soccer is a completely touch-free sport. So it's like basketball actually should be. You have these little guys walking around there, bouncing off the ball, falling over, bouncing against the ball again. But you usually should never bounce into anyone else. Still, it works a bit like actual competitive soccer, because once you go to the RoboCup World Championships, you want to add a rule. Your robot is not allowed to bounce into anyone else unless the other one is about to shoot a goal. Then bounce into it the hell you can. If you're the goalie, bounce into it the hell you can. If you're the last man before the goal, bounce into it the hell you can, because otherwise you're never going to win the RoboCup Soccer Championship. So what you would have to build is a system which never bounces into anyone unless it's necessary. Problem about these norms is that it's an enormous task to hand code all these crazy situations where you might actually rather want to run someone over and get a foul than get a goal. The question for us then was, well, maybe we can actually just provide starting obligations and then train the rest onto it. How do you do that? In a very painful process, which is basically encoding a logic program into an artificial neural network. You have something like B and C and not D, then do A, so standing in front of the goalie, having the ball, goalie's running towards me, I try to run through the goalie. You take these propositions, you actually build a classic localized network, so for each proposition you create a input neuron, you wire them up in terms of conjunctions and disjunctions per rule. Not so negated facts are just added with negative weights to it. And you churn this through your rule base. Since these rule bases are sometimes big, but not enormous, the networks actually end up not being that big either. And if you're doing it in the straightforward way, they're even backpropagation trainable. So, how do you thus build a competitive robo-soccer architecture? You take the starting normative codes, you convert these into logic programs. Now, these logic programs won't be contradiction-free because you don't bump into anyone except for case 1, 2, 3. So you want them with priorities. You want to be able to say, in certain cases, certain rules are important. These you then convert into extended logic programs, and you train a neural, or you build a neural network with this extended logic program. Once you got that on your robot, you can just send them play. And you get your reward function directly from the environment. So what you actually want to do is you either want to reprioritize certain rules, or you want to learn new rules into the pre-trained network. Concrete example, here you have something like the opponent is shooting and you're close to the opponent. In this case, you have the obligation to run the hell into the opponent. You're the goalkeeper, you're inside your own area. You're close to the opponent has the ball, run him over. You have a ball, you're close to the goal, and you're close to the opponent, also run into the opponent because they're probably going to do the same to you. Convert this into a network, it ends up like the little thing below. And actually, these robots, they aren't fully competitive because other people train many more rules, but it works to guide them. But the really curious question is the adaptation. It's not the original setup. It's can they learn new rules? Can they learn new priorities on the go? So what we did is we stripped off the norms. We just gave them an inconsistent rule base. So you have something like never bounce into an opponent, but bounce into an opponent never bounce into an opponent, but if you bounce into the opponent, do it with minimum impact. Or the more competitive rules, never bounce into an opponent. If the opponent is about to shoot, maximum impact. You then train your system on new examples. of this type of CTD, and actually it turns out, yes, the pre-configured network learns to adapt. So it learns these new priority rules over what is called a CTD, or a contrary to duty. This was a little experiment. We got it on one of the cases, which is the one depicted, to do it right in 95% of the cases. If it's getting a bit more elaborate, and you're having, for example, negations in your rules, you get it to add about 87, 90%. Still, that's pretty good because it's a proof of concept that you can adapt these rules. Also, we tried on a somewhat preconditioned network and a neutral network whether they can learn rules in the first place. Both of them aren't doing great, but at least the preconditioned one is doing better than the completely naive one. Okay, this was now a crazy parse thread through independent, somewhat remotely related topics. What we want to do today, and I'm not here as myself, I'm here as a part of a bigger unit, is we just want to say, hello Barcelona, we're around, we are here to stay. And if you actually are interested in trustworthy AI, so if you would, for example, like to think about, wait a second, most of what you showed is completely hand-waving. Yes, it is. We would like to get a quantitative definition of how to measure interpretability. We would like to get a benchmark up of how to actually assess explainability. If you're into multimodal emotion recognition and interaction, so questions from how do you actually get proper data sets via, maybe there's more to language than only the words, or you want to spend your time thinking about, well, so how exactly can I learn from a data set which I may not touch, which is highly anonymized, but for which I need 20 or 30 to actually get my model to a reasonable performance? In this case, write me an email, have a look at our vacancies, talk to Fermin, talk to the gentleman over there. Do we have anyone else from Alpha here currently? Yes. Yes. So come talk to us. We are friendly. We got free chocolate in the kitchen. And we got sea view from the office. Thank you. We're open for questions. Yes.
It's about the explainability topic. So you have talked about, or you have shown some methods that all are based on analyzing correlations. So they are working at the probabilistic inference level. You have not talked about causality, but when you are asking why you are asking about cause, not about correlation. Yeah. So are you thinking on introducing causality inference in your methods? Or
Fermin, do you just want to get a mic?
Actually, well, I think I can. Can people hear me? Yes, very much so. So some of us actually have been working on causality for a while, on different types of causality, from causality based on time series analysis to causality based on more like what Julia Perl was used to be doing.
So yeah, also if you're interested in causality, come and talk to us.
For him, not just the problem is that pixels cannot be causal. So
no.
You should define something that it's not yet defined.
Yes, they can be causal. In the Bayesian network sense of causality.
Well, they are causal in the network, but so one of the, this is not coming from us, but this is coming from good friends at, how are they called, Wright State University, Dayton, Ohio.